Hello, everybody. This is the Cinema Joes podcast. I am Justin, and I am usually joined by my two friends, Casey and Noah. However, they are indisposed at the moment, so we have a special guest here today. His name is Alex. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Well, we've actually had Alex on another episode, I believe our part 2 discussion of Gone Girl, which we recorded way back in 2014, I believe released last year. So it's good to have you back on, and we're going to be talking about something a little bit different today. We're specifically talking about summer 2016 films. This podcast is going to focus mostly on questions that we have. A lot of mine are related to, I guess you'd say, films that I'm looking forward to. I think, Alex, you might have some stuff that's a little more wide-ranging, but I'm really interested to hear them. So why don't we start with you, and what's one of your intriguing questions for this coming year, or this summer specifically?
Oh, that's a lot of hype. Okay. Well, one of my questions that were intriguing to me, at least, was what horror film will own this summer? And so the question here comes from the fact that, in researching the summer releases, I noticed that a couple of big movies that were horror films were coming out this summer, which is a little bit unusual. Generally, you don't get major summer releases for horror films. They usually stick to the fall around Halloween, but every once in a while you will see a summer release and sometimes even really take off. Like, for instance, a few years ago, The Conjuring was a very big summer hit. And now in 2016, The Conjuring is coming back with a sequel, very minimally titled The Conjuring 2. I noticed that that's going to be coming out. But in addition, also The Purge Election Year. That's the third installment of that series of horror films. And a new movie called Lights Out. This is, of course, based off of a short film that was released in 2013. It won a lot of awards, as far as I can tell. And is very interesting in terms of its minimalistic approach to horror. Almost an elemental approach, if you will. Do you know anything about this film, Justin?
Mostly like the short film, like you said, it's actually, I remember hearing about it before I knew they were making a feature of it. But yeah, it was like one of those things that just seems so, like you said, very minimal, kind of relying on this light switch of like someone seeing a dark figure when the lights are off, then turning on, seeing they're not there. So I felt like there was this element of second guessing in that person's mind, which really, really made me feel uneasy. And I think will be interesting to see how they attempt to extend that to feature length.
Yeah, and I think that aspect of it, that kind of just very, very basic level of storytelling in the horror film, could really open up its appeal to wide audiences. I think sometimes horror movies get a little bit too obsessed with the gore or the grime or their kind of tortured backstories of their protagonists, or it can sometimes be a little alienating. But I think with this, it's just so basic, and anybody who's ever seen a horror movie can connect with the idea of like the lights go out and a scary figure is there. So I think it really has a lot of potential, and I think that the studio thinks that as well. It's being released the same weekend as Star Trek Beyond and Ice Age Collision Course. That's the third installment of the Star Trek franchise and the fifth of Ice Age. And so to me, that seems like tough competition in terms of known quantities versus a brand new property. So I think that the studio agrees with me that it actually could really yield dividends. But in order to do so, it's going to have to compete against the juggernaut that is the Conjuring franchise, which the first one made a ton of money. I don't think it broke into the top 10 that year, but I think it came very close to doing so, which is pretty difficult for a horror movie to do. And that, of course, stars Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. They play ghost hunters, scientists. They are based off of real characters. These stories are supposedly based off of real stories that had happened to these historic figures in the 70s. It had a very big following. Now, it also had a spin-off sequel, I think about a year ago, called Annabelle, which did not do well. And I'm interested to see whether that would actually hurt the brand, or if maybe one of the reasons why Annabelle didn't do so well was people didn't realize it was a Conjuring film and that they'll show back up for the main sequel. But then you also have a movie called The Purge Election Year. And I don't know, how much, Justin, do you know about the Purge franchise?
I don't know a ton. I remember seeing the trailer for the first one, and I think hearing that it apparently didn't really use its premise as much as a lot of people had hoped it would, and that apparently the subsequent film, Anarchy, I believe was the subtitle, did a lot more of that, and really focused on Frank Grillo's character, I guess. I assume it's supposed to be topical. I'm not exactly sure what that allegory is, but
I'll tell you this. The basic conceit of these movies is that in a world not too dissimilar from ours, the powers that be have decided that the best way to eliminate crime is to allow one night a year where all crime is legal,
right,
including murder. And you need to basically bunker down in that one night and survive. And then society, at least as the film will tell you, is peaceful and serene. But what the movies kind of get at, and they slowly build this over the course of the first two movies, is this idea that this is really a metaphor for class warfare and the different benefits the upper class has to the lower class in this society, where the very rich people can simply live behind their iron gates with their advanced security systems and security forces, and the regular people who can't afford those types of protections are forced to kind of survive by their wits and hope that everything goes okay. And so, I think right away you could tell maybe that metaphor has some relevance to what's been going on in our cultural conversation the last few years of the 99% versus the 1%, and the income inequality in this country and how that relates to political power. And Purge has decided to really jump right on top of this by titling their latest movie The Purge Election Year. And I believe the premise is all about how there is one of the sole survivors of a previous film has kind of gained a lot of notoriety for kind of arguing against this system of the status quo, where the rich are able to protect themselves and not have any negative consequences of the purge, while millions of poor and middle class people suffer. That she's been able to kind of create a political platform out of that. And on this purge night, it is right before the general election, where she is trying to be elected president so she can change the purge and eliminate the purge. And so, of course, perfect opportunity for the powers that be to try to take her out, so that way she's no longer a threat to their power. And that, to me, seems so zeitgeisty and of the moment right now.
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, in our actual election, pretty much everybody is trying to argue that they are for disruption of the status quo and arguing against the 1% and the powers that be that are controlling the special interests of Washington and all of this. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it could really hit huge in terms of being right at the center of that conversation, but in a very fun, murdery kind of way that can be, unfortunately, can open up that conversation to more people. I say unfortunate because it would be great if we could have those kind of conversations without having to murder people to get people's attention. But, anything that'll get the message across, I think, is good. So I think that all three of these movies have a lot of interesting components to them that could really be transcendent in terms of which one will catch fire. Now, it's possible that more than one will, but I think that one will end up being the dominant horror film of the summer. And I don't know. I think that I think Conjuring is the least of that three. What do you think after that explanation?
I've heard really good things about the first Conjuring, and then not so great things about Annabelle. I'm not incredibly well versed in current horror, at least with respect to the more mainstream releases, especially like during the summer. I expect something like Lights Out, and what I think is actually good about that is that you don't necessarily need stars in this kind of genre. Like, you don't need something as simple as the premise of Lights Out, and people's already existing love of this genre could be enough to really set it over the top. It was interesting. I think the one thing that I'm interested to see when you were talking about the Purge film is I haven't seen any of the films, so I don't know how effectively they play into a lot of those things that you mentioned in terms of really reflecting the zeitgeist of the time. So I'm interested to see if that is something that they really roll with, or if it's just something to kind of put as your premise to say, oh, this is what makes it a different Purge movie, and look, it's current. I mean, obviously we're not going to know until we see it, but yeah, I don't know. In terms of box office, I have good feelings for Lights Out, I'd say. Yeah, there's something about the simplicity of it that I think, and we've seen it before with films like Paranormal Activity, that seem fairly cheap to make and don't really boast any big stars, but just kind of catch this, like you said, just kind of catch fire. Yeah, and don't really rely on gore, like you were saying.
I think that's the one that people are expecting the least from, and I think that's going to be the surprise hit of the three. So, but it'll be interesting to see. So, moving on, what's your number 5?
Okay, well, so this is a question in relation to Captain America: Civil War, which comes out May 6th. I was a really big fan of Winter Soldier, and a lot of the same team is returning. So I guess my question for that film is, how will the Russo brothers, who did such a good job with Winter Soldier, I thought, how will they handle this bigger scale and a larger cast of characters, especially considering a lot of those characters will probably end up in their own solo movies. I believe there's already release dates for those, so I'm interested to see how they handle that, because I really felt like what made something like Winter Soldier so good was that it focused on a relatively small amount of characters, Captain America, Black Widow, and Falcon, and kind of about their relations with one another, but also against this huge juggernaut of an organization that had infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D., and so it almost seemed like the sense that you got was that the entire world was after them almost. That very much fit in with what I think that film was trying to do, which was really be an intentional 70s conspiracy thriller in the mode of something like 3 Days of the Condor, and really about these people get caught up in this conspiracy that they don't know a lot about. This time, I'm not exactly sure what if there even is a conceit of Civil War. And as I say that, I do want to point out that I really am looking forward to this movie. So it has nothing. It's not like I don't think there's some kind of plan in place, but I'm interested to see if this is kind of in keeping with the previous Captain America films in terms of really being intentional about being a specific genre of film, or if this is just kind of like something else. And making sure, I think that it looks like the spotlight is pretty firmly rooted on Captain America and Iron Man in particular. It's interesting to see how they integrate the rest of the cast, and hoping that they're just more than cameos and that they have an actual impact on the plot and the rest of the characters. So it's kind of my general curiosities about that film.
Well, and I mean, I'm looking forward to it a lot. I don't think that it will be a genre picture the way that the previous Captain America ones were, but I think that the common link between the first two movies in the Captain America franchise is that there's a lot of things going on in the background. You know, the first Captain America movie, he's leading a team of soldiers from the war. In the second one, he's leading his little insurgent team. This one, he's going to be leading an Avengers team. But what actually is at the heart of every one of those movies is these very intimate relationships that he has with 2 or 3 people in his life that mean more to him than anything else that's going on in this crazy world that we're living in. And I think that will be the common link between those movies and Civil War. And I think that's what I'm most looking forward to, and how they can kind of merge this big idea of superheroes fighting against each other with this small, intimate character drama that's been playing out slowly over the course of these films.
Hoping they do that. What's your next question?
Well, my next question comes from the fact that when I was looking through all of these summer releases, I was surprised by how many kids movies there are this year. Now, there's always a handful of children's movies because it is summer and they're a big audience. You know, we usually have 1 or 2 films that make a ton of money in the summer, and then 1 or 2 that are either smaller or kind of misfires, but you really don't get more than 4 or 5 in a summer. And this year, it seems like quite a bit more than that. Just looking through this list, you have Universal's film, The Secret Life of Pets. You have the Angry Birds movie by Sony. You have Ice Age Collision Course by Fox. You have the BFG from Disney, a live action movie, and Pete's Dragon, another live action movie by Disney. And of course, these are all going to be second to what will surely be the gigantic Finding Dory, the sequel to Finding Nemo from Pixar. So my question is, who will be second place? Who will be runner-up in this race to capture the imaginations of our youth? I think if we just run down this list, each one has a kind of a compelling case. Some slightly more compelling than others. I know that The Secret Life of Pets, man, that just seems like it's going to be the big juggernaut, I think. I remember the first time that I heard of this movie, it was seeing the trailer to it in front of Star Wars The Force Awakens. That was opening night, so it was a packed house, families, everybody was so excited to see it, so they were really jazzed, and they were almost as excited by this Secret Life of Pets trailer as anything that happened in the actual movie. The audience was huge about this, and there was one guy who was sitting next to me in the theater, and he just could not contain himself as the dog was like running around in a circle waiting for his owner, and the cat was eating the cake out of the fridge. He just like lost his mind. He loved it so much, and I think that left a big impression on me. So while this might not be my most anticipated movie of the summer, I think it's going to be a lot of people's, and I think it's going to be gigantic. But then, we have other movies like the Angry Birds movie. Like, how big is that going to be? I feel like if it was released 2 or 3 years ago, it would be the movie to beat this summer. I feel like in the last few years, the IPO of this movie is kind of not as prevalent as it used to be. I don't necessarily see as many kids walking around with their Angry Birds lunchboxes and as many people on the subway playing Angry Birds on their phones. It seems like the moment kind of passed, but it's an all-star cast. We've never seen an animated version of these characters before, as far as I know. I mean, I could be wrong. There could be some, like Nickelodeon original series cartoon of them, but I don't think so. So it seems like an odd choice for them to do it now, but they definitely have a high name recognition, and maybe like lingering affections for these characters will transcend our lack of interest currently and cause a huge explosion of support to see the movie. On that same note, we have Ice Age, which is coming out from Fox. It's the 5th installment of this movie series. This franchise started in 2002. Think about that for a second. Most of the kids who were going to be in the audience to see this movie were not alive when that first one came out. So, many of their parents weren't in relationships. Many of their parents may have been in the audience to see the first one. That's how old this franchise is. So I don't know. Each movie of the last 3, I think, have been making less and less money. They seem less and less relevant. But it's getting released right dead center in the summer. I think it's like the week before 4th of July weekend, maybe. It's definitely in that like late June period. So the studios definitely got its support. They're definitely confident in it. So who knows? Maybe they know something I don't, but I don't see it. But then we have these 2 live action films from Disney. And Disney's been making a lot of very popular live action films in the last few years, starting with the first Alice in Wonderland film, going to Cinderella, which Kenneth Branagh directed last year. It was received strong enough to get an Academy Award for costuming, so they have that. And also, most recently, The Jungle Book just came out about a month ago, and it's been really successful. So they clearly think that they can tap into their old vault of films and kind of repurpose them for a wide audience again. And I think that's what they're hoping for when it comes to a movie like Pete's Dragon, which is not a property that I'm very familiar with. I know it came out in the 70s, and it is somehow different from Puff the Magic Dragon, which also came out in the 70s, but I couldn't tell you how. But interestingly enough, for that movie, Justin, do you know who the director of that movie is?
For Pete's Dragon, I believe that'd be David Lowery.
Yeah, and you know what he did most recently?
Ain't Them Bodies Saints, I believe.
You would be correct, and that is a strange follow-up choice, in my opinion. That movie, of course, is like a neo-Western film. The cinematography is just gorgeous. Acting by Casey Affleck and Rooney Mara is really on point. It's a very quiet indie movie. and I just don't see how Pete's Dragon comes right after that, but I guess it is. So,
well, I mean, Alex Ross Perry is doing Winnie the Pooh, so
this
I mean,
is also
anything's
true.
possible. That was my thought when I found out he was doing. Like, I was like, "Who's David Lowery?" And like, that's a guy who did Ain't Them Bodies Saints. Well, but yeah,
I mean, I get it. Everybody's got to make money, but he can bring some of the majesty of Ain't Them Bodies Saints to a movie about flying dragon. We'll find out. But I think the movie that is the biggest question mark out of these for me is the Steven Spielberg film, The BFG. Now, to my mind, Steven Spielberg has been out of the family movie making business for a while now. He's been very focused on kind of like the Academy Award fare. Most recently, Bridge of Spies. You know, he's done Munich. He did a few years ago. He did War of the Worlds, which is certainly not awards worthy, but also not E.T. For kids. Kind of the flip side of E.T. if you think about it. It's going to be interesting to see how he goes back to that world. I know he did, I think in 2011, come out with The Adventures of Tintin, which was an animated film, and that was not a very successful effort. I think part of it was because it is mostly a European property that they tried to bring over to the United States, and I just don't think there was enough appeal there, enough name recognition there, and I think some of the animation style that they chose was, I think, a little off-putting to some people. So I'm not going to put that entirely on Steven Spielberg's feet, but I think it's going to be very interesting to see if he can reharness that like Amblin magic so many decades later. So yeah, that's my big question. Which one of these is actually going to be crowned prince of the kids' film list? And I will note that the second Alice in Wonderland movie is coming out this summer. I'm not including it on this list, though, because to me, that feels much more action-y. It feels much more similar to a Captain America movie than it does a Finding Nemo movie. I think that they're going for a slightly older family dynamic or market than most of these other films. So I think that it's okay to leave that off the list, but I think that also is going to make a ton of money. So what do you think out of all those films?
I was thinking earlier that something like Ice Age Collision Course would make a ton of money. That was before I knew that apparently the sequels had been kind of dropping in terms of the money they made. But I will say that I think it's interesting that they seem to be marketing a lot more toward the Scrat character, which I see as being very appealing to families, maybe more so than the characters that are ostensibly the main characters. I mean, gosh, it seems like all the marketing just seems targeted toward that squirrel and getting the acorn. So I don't know. There was something about that I thought would be appealing. Like you said, this franchise has been around for a little while. That said, I mean, there have been some franchises that, like Toy Story that did incredible business 15 years later. Granted, probably a little more acclaim and a little more success with the Toy Story franchise than the Ice Age franchise. Guardedly saying, I think that's going to be one of the big ones. With regard to the live action ones that you mentioned, though, I'm curious to see how they do financially, let alone critically, or just because they are based on properties like a lot of the other live action movies, like Cinderella and Maleficent, but I don't know if those properties are as established as the other ones, or even like the Jungle Book this year. I imagine like people have some familiarity with the Jungle Book, but I don't know. Do kids today know the BFG, or do enough of their parents know it? I don't know. I mean, I don't think anyone has heard of Pete's Dragon, other than people who maybe grew up with the film. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if those don't do as well as some of the other ones because they don't have as much name recognition. I don't know if there's anyone in those casts that really like stands out as a selling point either.
You don't think the kids are going to be knocking down the door to see Mark Rylance?
Considering I barely knew who he was until last year, I'd say probably not. It'd be interesting to see. I mean, I hope they do well. I guess I'll stick with my bet of Ice Age, though. I liked what you were saying about Secret Life of Pets, too, especially considering it's the same studio behind Despicable Me movies.
And I think that Kevin Hart plays a bunny. So, I mean, come on. That's
I think you're
definitely
right,
going to
yeah.
make a ton of money.
Well, so my number 4 question, I guess, or my second question, however you want to put it, is in regard to an upcoming film called The Lobster, which is the latest film from Yorgos Lanthimos, a Greek filmmaker making his English language debut. I can't imagine there's going to be another film like this year. From what I understand, the premise of it is in regard to people who, if they're single, they have a certain amount of time to find significant other. If they don't, then they are transformed into an animal and let loose in the woods. It is stars Colin Farrell, and it has Rachel Weisz in it as well. And watching the trailers for this, even though I'm not very familiar with Lanthimos, the style of it reminded me a little bit of some films that I saw last year that I quite liked, such as A Pigeon Sat on a Branch Reflecting on Existence from Roy Andersson, Amour Fou from Jessica Hausner. Just these very kind of austere kind of settings where I find there's a lot of humor in those kinds of environments. And I have a funny feeling that this film will be somewhat in keeping with that. But yeah, I guess my question for this movie is this film a breakthrough for Lanthimos? This is his first English language film. Is it something that audiences are going to respond to, or it will just be kind of another head scratcher for them and just kind of be one of those critical movies? So yeah, I'm interested to see how that turns out.
I know it's a movie that I'm definitely excited to see. I feel like it was never going to be released. I feel like I've been hearing about it for years now. It's like another one of those midnight special type films where it's going to come out at the end of this year, then it's going to come out at the end of next year, and then it's going to come out eventually. I'm very excited to see it. I love Colin Farrell. I like especially his choices recently. Even when he's in a bad property, he's good in it. So, and this doesn't seem like a bad property. This seems weird in all the right ways. And just the cast is so strong, and I love to see a strong cast make a weird movie because, usually when you can get that high caliber of actor into one space, it's to do a sure bet that doesn't really need them, And I think that a movie that lets all these people be weird is a movie that I want to see. So I'm excited to see it.
Cool. All right, well, why don't we move to your third question?
Okay, yeah, my number 3. The first 2 were about a set of, a category of films. The next 3 are going to be a little bit faster of a discussion because they're going to be tied to one specific film each, similar to your list. So the first of these types of questions is related to Neighbors. Now, I know you've seen Neighbors, and you didn't like it as much as I did.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
That's fair. Yeah.
But the thing that I liked about it is that I just found it a movie that was a lot smarter than it seemed like it was going to be, and maybe smarter than it should have been. It's Nick Stoller as the director. He's, of course, became famous by directing Forgetting Sarah Marshall. He's always got his hand in something interesting. He's also one of the executive producers on The Carmichael Show for NBC. I don't know if you're familiar with that
I'm familiar with it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's Gerard Carmichael is a stand-up comedian, and he has a new sitcom on NBC. This isn't a TV podcast, but it's great. It's basically just like a modern version of All in the Family, tackling real issues and stuff. And I feel like that's what Nick Stoller does best in his films, is really tackle real issues that people are confronting in their everyday lives in this weird kind of R-rated heightened world. And that's what I like the most about Neighbors the first time around, was that it had this relationship at its center with Seth Rogen and Rose Byrne, where they were a married couple who had a new baby, and they lived next door to a frat house, and they wanted the frat house to go away. But the movie itself is fundamentally about this connection between these two characters, and particularly Rose Byrne's refusal to play the role of the shrewish kind of wife/girlfriend that is often cast in these man-child rom-com kind of R-rated comedies that Seth Rogen is usually the star of. And I just love that. And I thought it was so interesting, and the gender dynamics that were at play was really interesting. And now we have this sequel, and can it be as smart and interesting in that area as the first one surprisingly was? And based on the trailer that I saw, I'm kind of optimistic. The movie, of course, is called Neighbors 2 Sorority Rising. So right away, you see they're leaning into the kind of gender questions that rose from that first movie. Chloe Grace Moretz plays a woman who is not interested in being part of the narrow, feminized definition of what it means to be a young woman on a college campus as far as regular sororities like to define them, and decides to break out on her own and create a new sorority that parties just as hard as the guys do and is not restricted to these obnoxious gender norms that we often are forced to live under. And I think that's a really cool premise as a way to kind of follow up the question of, why does a middle-aged woman have to be the buzzkill of the story? why does the young woman have to be the prim and proper, cutesy kind of I love pink and Gucci sweatpants girl? Like there's nothing wrong with being that girl, but that's every girl isn't like that. And I think it's interesting that they're choosing to go in that direction. Now, can they execute it? I don't know, but they executed it much better than I thought they could in the first one. So I'm anxious to see the follow-up. You have any thoughts on this?
Well, I guess I wonder if the film is interested in exploring any kind of alternative to either being that kind of like straight-laced, very prim and proper kind of sorority girl that it seems like they're making Selena Gomez out to be. They're more like kind of hard partying, like you said, like the men kind of thing. Like I'm interested to see if the film is interested in any kind of alternative to one of those two options. Who knows? It might even make me watch it.
I agree. I think that it needs to be more than just girls can be like boys also. Like it needs to have more nuance than that. But I don't think you're going to get that nuance in a trailer. So that's why I'm still cautiously optimistic. And at the end of the day, if Chloe Grace Moretz can be as funny as Zac Efron was in the first one in a similar role, I'm going to still be pretty satisfied. And I don't know if anybody watches 30 Rock, but she had a recurring character on that show that made me realize that she can be as good of a comedic actress as she is a dramatic actress, if not better. So I'm excited to see her get this platform, much more so than when she was the star of The Fifth Wave.
Just a quick tangent here, but there was a film last year called Clouds of Sils Maria.
Yes, I did not see that, but I wanted to.
I will definitely say Chloe Grace Moretz's performance in that is probably more in line with a comedic performance. And I think it works really well.
Okay.
So I do want to back you up on that. In any case, my third question is in regard to another movie that I'm looking forward to. It is The Nice Guys. And specifically, not having seen really a lot of Shane Black's work, let me rephrase that, not having seen any of Shane Black's work, I'm interested to see this guy who seems to have a propensity for comedy and violence and usually absurdity too, how he works with actors like Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling, who strike me as very different kinds of actors, and I believe this is the first time that they're working with Shane Black. I'm interested to see what that relationship is, and if this is the kind of thing that maybe like goes off the rails, like maybe Gosling is too much in the vein of Nicolas Cage in one of his crazier roles and Russell Crowe's too blank, or if they really do find a good way of making them feel like a comedic dynamic duo, which I believe they can be. Actually, a big fan of the trailer, while acknowledging that trailers mean absolutely nothing. They can at least make you excited for a film. But
we just go back for a second. I can't believe how harsh you were on Nicolas Cage just there. It's like a drive-by. Come on.
I mean, I'm thinking particularly The Wicker Man.
You mean his best performance? The bees, not the bees. Come on. How is that now not how he got his Oscar?
Well, it's funny because I Gosling, who, I obviously have more faith in him than Nicolas Cage at this point. But, I'm interested to see if that character is like maybe too much or if it feels just right. And if that kind of approach works well bouncing off someone like Russell Crowe, who looks a little more laid back, though he seems maybe the more violent of the two. So,
well, he is Superman's dad. He's got to throw his head around.
Well, I think it's right potential for comedic possibilities, which is really the thing I'm looking forward to, and seeing how the two of them work together and work with Black. Do you have any thoughts? Particularly Shane Black?
I'm not that much more familiar with him than you. I never saw Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. I'm not a fan of the Lethal Weapon films for the most part. I just feel like you see one buddy cop movie, you've seen all of the buddy cop movies. But, I did see Iron Man 3, which he directed. And I thought that he brought, that franchise is defined by its personality and charisma. And he has a very different personality and charisma to Jon Favreau, and I thought that he was able to use that force of personality to kind of compensate for the lack of Favreau while bringing a whole different dimension to the film. Not the best film, unfortunately, but I thought it had a lot on its mind, and it tried to do a lot more stuff. I think that maybe they could have done a few more passes on the screenplay, would have been better for everybody, but Marvel's a machine, so you got to put them out when they're ready. So I'm definitely intrigued, mostly by Ryan Gosling, I'll admit. I think he walked a very delicate line in The Big Short. where he could have gone too far. And I think many people would say he did go too far. And I think this is going to be the exact same sort of tightrope that he's going to have to walk. So it'll be interesting to see how he pulls it off in this genre.
That's a really good comparison. And I quite liked him in the Big Short.
I liked him too, but he didn't work for everybody.
I could see why, but they're wrong. So what's your, I guess, number 2 most burning question?
Yeah, my number 2 most pressing question of the summer. It's a very short one. It's Ben-Hur. Why? I don't know why this thing exists. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's a remake from a Charlton Heston film from 1958, which is, I guess, a film classic, but I certainly haven't seen it. I don't see it having a huge cultural footprint these days. I don't think there's a lot of people knocking down the door waiting for a high-budget action version of this movie. And I think you can tell that there's maybe not the most enthusiasm around this movie by the people who they got to make this movie. Not sure if you're familiar with the director, but he has made such classics as Wanted and Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. So you know that he knows how to do historical fiction with a movie like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter under his belt. So yeah, I don't know why this is happening. I don't know if you could explain it to me. But I think that it's going to be a disaster. And, it's starring Jack Houston, who, that huge megastar, Jack Houston, that everybody talks about all the time. Not since the star of Clash of the Titans and Avatar. You know that guy, remember? Oh, you don't? Oh,
yes.
Sorry.
Sam Worthington.
Come on, you're the only person who remembers his name. So yeah, I know you've seen Jack Houston in Boardwalk Empire. I think that's his most prominent credit. He's also had bit parts in things like not Silver Linings Playbook, American Hustle. But I just don't think he's capable of carrying this kind of huge 2-hour plus biblical epic film. What do you think?
It's funny. I just remembered he was also Jack Kerouac in Kill Your Darlings.
That's true. And he was good. He was good in that. That was a very small role.
But a small part.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But yeah, Boardwalk Empire is where I'm most familiar with him. And I echo your sentiments. When I heard they were making it, I was like, what? But yeah, Jack Houston in Boardwalk Empire, he playing Richard Harrow, I feel like that performance is more in line with something like John Hurt in The Elephant Man than it is with Charlton Heston in Ben-Hur. I don't think there's anything in that performance that would lead me to say this is a guy who needs to play Judah Ben-Hur, who's this very kind of gregarious character. I'd say like very much in the mode of a traditional kind of action hero. I'd say Richard Harrow was not that. So I don't know what kind of criteria they used for casting him. I believe you may have said that he wasn't the first choice, which makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, I believe, as far as I know, Tom Hiddleston was attached to star in this movie and was actually, for a while, attached to star. And then right before pre-production started, he kind of backed out of the movie for a better project, I believe. So, and I think that's a movie that still wouldn't have been excited to see, but like I would have been at least more interested to see what Tom Hiddleston action star would have been like.
Yeah.
Much more than Jack Houston action star.
I hate to like not give like a definitive yes or no answer, but I'm ambivalent, leaning towards no, that Jack Houston will be able to carry this. Yeah, and then I think also like Toby Kebbell is playing Masala, who's a very key character in that film. I wanted to also point out that the 1959 Ben-Hur, which is the best known, is actually, there were 2 other versions before that one. And it was kind of seen as this bigger, it was going to be a bigger production than any of those. And they got a top-tier Hollywood director to do it. They got Charlton Heston, who was a huge star. And like you were saying, like it doesn't seem like there's the same kind of confidence here. In fact, it seems like maybe the opposite. This is not like a top-known director. I believe Timur, I forget his last name.
You'll notice that I didn't say it for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. There's not that same kind of confidence, and there was more cause, I feel like, at that time. I mean, that was a top-grossing film. It was seen as this really huge production. I don't see that same thing here.
I will say that if this movie is good, it'll probably be because of Toby Kebbell in the antagonist role. I think he was very good as an ape in the Planet of the Apes
I agree.
Movies.
Koba. Yeah.
Yes. Caesar loves humans, Koba loves apes. I think that went somewhere along those lines. But, he hasn't really made a big impression in live action films that I've seen. His most high profile one there was the Fantastic Four remake from last year, which was a disaster, but not not necessarily because of him, but he certainly didn't help the situation. But I definitely think that had more to do with the fact that the studio had no idea what they wanted Doctor Doom to be, who Toby Kebbell played in that movie, than his performance necessarily. I believe he started out when the film was originally shot. He was this like rogue hacker who was really into like gaming and stuff like that. And then like by the end, when the movie actually comes out, he's not that at all. And it's clear that they just like jettisoned huge aspects of his story arc. And so I don't really feel like it's his fault that that movie, that role was bad or that he was bad in it. But certainly I need to see him be better on screen outside of ape CGI effects. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. What's your next movie?
My next is in regard to Finding Dory, probably the most anticipated animated film coming out this year. And it's specifically in relation to the fact that this is not only a sequel, but is a sequel after a long period of time. I believe the original came out in 2003, and so it's been a while now. Andrew Stanton is returning, but my question specifically is: this the kind of Pixar sequel that is more in the mode of something like the Toy Story films, which have all been very successful and have, I think, really evolved? They're not just telling the same kind of story over again. Or will this be something more in the mode of something like a film that I recall liking when I first saw it, but it has kind of depreciated in my mind, something like Monsters University, which was, well, for one thing, was done by a different creative team, so I think that might be a component. But yeah, is this going to be something that's kind of is a very successful sequel that's worthy of being compared to, if not, argued for being even better than the original, like I think Pixar has managed to do with the Toy Story films? Or is this something more just kind of like a nice thing that Pixar did and not really necessarily going to expand the story in any way? I have a funny feeling they're going to go in some interesting territory with Dory specifically. I don't know how they're going to do it. So what kind of sequel is this? I don't know. Do you think that Finding Nemo is the kind of story that has potential to really evolve and maybe even make us appreciate the first film even more?
Well, I think that I like the direction that they seem to be going with it, which is basically to make it more of a spin-off than a sequel, because I think that story was a closed loop. Like at the end of Finding Nemo, it told the story that it wanted to tell, and I don't think there was a lot more that the father and son character could really, they could go on another adventure, but it's going to feel superfluous. Like the reason why Finding Nemo was so great was those stakes that it had and that emotional connection between those two characters. And, Albert Brooks's father character refusing to give up on his son and not wanting to lose the little family that he has left, and like learning slowly how to love his son while letting him be his own person and live his own life. Like that's a very deep and profound message to share. And it's joined with the Nemo character who really like comes of age in that story and learns how to be his own person, and that he can find value, and that other people can find value in him, not just his father. So I wouldn't necessarily like a movie that just now they go on another wacky adventure, but I don't think that's what it is. I think it's definitely more of a spin-off movie with the Dory character. And Ellen DeGeneres doesn't really do a lot of stuff that she doesn't want to do. Nobody really twists her arm to go into these like projects that she's not really fully behind. And, she has a very successful talk show. She is a very successful comedian. She doesn't need to do anything else that she doesn't want to do. So I have some faith that if she's in this and she's the center of the movie, that she made that choice because it's good and that the script is there. I don't think that I think she cares about her legacy, and I think she cares about that film because that film really helped her break back into the mainstream when she was really on the rocks after, her sitcom failed when she came out of the closet and no one really wanted to go near her in Hollywood. They gave her a chance, gave her a very memorable role. She did a great job in it. And I think she owes a lot of her ability to get back into mainstream culture to the chance that those filmmakers gave her. So I think she cares a lot about the franchise. I don't think she would just do it as a cash grab. So that's why I have confidence in the fact that it's going to be good, even though I don't necessarily know how it's going to be, what it's going to be, I should say.
All right, cool. Well, what's your number one, your burning question?
Yes, my number one burning question is, it's, you think that it's probably going to be about Captain America because you know that that's my favorite, my most anticipated film. I'm so excited to see it, but I don't actually have any questions about that movie because I feel like I have so much confidence that it's going to be really good. I don't know what kind of question I could ask. So instead, I'm going to ask a question about another comic book property that I have a lot less confidence in after seeing its most recent installment, and that's The Suicide Squad. I'm really curious as to what that movie is going to end up being and if DC Films is able to use it as a way to course correct their shared universe, which kind of debuted in Batman versus Superman Dawn of Justice to a very, very small group of very excited, passionate defenders and a large group of people who saw it and regretted doing so. So this movie seems like it is everything that movie wasn't. The Suicide Squad I'm talking about seems like it is a major shift away from what was happening in Dawn of Justice, where Dawn of Justice was fairly humorless. It was kind of meandering and complicated in unnecessary ways and kind of had a difficult time realizing what was good about it and accentuating it. So it spent a lot of time with Batman having nightmares and a lot less time giving an opportunity to, say, the Wonder Woman character, which everyone seemed to really like. She basically just shows up. She has 2 scene-stealing moments in galas, is on a plane for a while, gets to watch some cool movies on her computer, and then pops up at the end for no apparent reason and is awesome. So maybe if they were able to realize that everyone liked Wonder Woman and was going to like the Wonder Woman character, they could have adjusted and had less pouty Superman and nightmare obsessed Batman. But with this movie, with Suicide Squads, there's, the center characters seem to be Will Smith, who is very rarely bad as a central character, and Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, who is a character that many people have been waiting to see come on screen for a very long time. And the trailers make her seem like she's stealing every one of the scenes that she's in. So I'm excited. It seems to have a nice balance of humor and action and characters who are not these monolithic, godlike beings who all hate the burden that they are forced to live underneath. They just seem like these characters with not much to lose who like to have fun and are kind of being forced into being a little good, but not afraid to be a little bad at the same time. I think that even if this is good, it could be an aberration because we're right back to Zack Snyder's Justice League next year. And that could mean that it's more brooding, sad, mopey superheroes who are super annoyed that they have to protect people. But even if it's the case, I'm still looking forward to Suicide Squads. I just hope that they learned some of the lessons that everyone tried to teach them with Batman versus Superman and can use this Suicide Squad movie as a way to really relaunch their cinematic universe. What do you think?
It's funny because when I heard about it, I almost wondered if it was like DC's answer to the Guardians of the Galaxy, though with maybe a darker edge even than that film. But at least it looks like these people are actually having fun. I mean, gosh.
Now, it is possible that we are seeing all of the moments of fun in the film, like what happened with the Batman v Superman, where there's 2 jokes in the entire film, and one of them was in the trailer. So it's possible that they're really just, they know that this is what we want, even if it's not what we're going to get, and so they're just going to give it to us in the trailers, but I hope that's not the case.
And I also heard that they were doing reshoots on Suicide Squad to try to create more humor.
Yes, that is the rumor, but the director, David Ayer, who is also a big reason why I'm excited for this film, because he's responsible for some really great films, including End of Watch. I did not see the tank movie that he made, Fury.
It's good.
It seemed like a lot, though. Yeah, he supposedly he said that it was not to put in jokes, but to beef up the action sequences, that the studio was willing to give them more money to help improve the action sequences. because they have a lot of confidence in the film and are willing to invest more than they originally thought they wanted to, and that's why. And it's not because the movie wasn't funny and now they're making it more funny. But of course, when a director is coming out talking about that, like there's a certain amount of spin involved. So it's hard to say if we can really take his word for that or not.
Well, I remember being really confused when I heard that because the tone seemed comedic from the beginning.
Yes.
You know, again with a darker edge. Though I will say the one. And part of the reason why I think it's going to do well, I think, assuming it's good, I think one of the reasons it can do well is because how well something like Deadpool did. And Deadpool, had the disadvantage of being rated R, even though that was a lot of what made the comedy work.
Yeah,
in that
so
film.
It proved to not necessarily be a disadvantage. I know, it's still one of the highest grossing superhero movies of all time.
So to see that do so well, and then to see this whole thing centered around these, villains who are heroes or are anti-heroes, I can see that being something very appealing to people. At the same time, is DC the same kind of brand recognition that something like Marvel has? Probably not. But, they've really done a good job with marketing this, so it makes me think that at least the first weekend it's going to make out like gangbusters.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm also a little curious as to if the fact that suicide is in the title is going to affect their box office at all. There's going to be a lot of 6 and 7-year-olds who got their parents to let them see Batman versus Superman: Dawn of Justice, but who will have a harder time convincing them to bring them to a movie called Suicide Squad. But even harder than a movie like Deadpool, which, like, nothing in that title necessarily makes it seem like they're, like, that hardcore. A lot of kids talked their parents into letting them see that movie because it was a superhero movie, even though it was rated R, and they all learned what pegging was. So good for them. But yeah, so it'll be interesting, I think. But I just hope that this is good and that this can kind of make everything else better afterwards, because, we're going to be seeing these movies in perpetuity regardless, and it would be nice if they were good, or at least watchable.
You would hope. Okay, well, on a definitely very unrelated note, my burning question is in regard to my most anticipated film of the summer, which is a very different movie, I think, from Suicide Squad. It's called Dheepan, and it's the latest film from Jacques Audiard. It's actually won the Palme d'Or at last year's Cannes Film Festival. What I found particularly intriguing about that win is that the jury was headed by the Coen brothers, so it comes with their stamp of approval. It's, from what I understand, it's about a man who actually takes the identity of a dead man named Dheepan and decides to make a new life for himself in France. He is a veteran of the Sri Lankan Civil War, fighting with the Tamil Tigers. Yeah, decides to make a new life for himself in France and goes over there with a kind of a people that are posing as his family, even though they're not related to him at all, and takes residence in a place that seems very prone to violence. So it's very much about leaving this violent place and traveling to a place you think is going to be peaceful, but ends up being kind of like going from, well, if not out of the frying pan into the fire, then into a similar situation, though with very different politics going on. And there's something I really like about that, and also the fact that this director, who is another director whose work is mostly a blind spot for me. I've heard very good things about A Prophet and Rust and Bone. I like the fact that it seems like this is a story about family, but it's like a very unconventional family, and kind of about the bonds that they assumedly forge over the course of this film. It's been very well reviewed. The actor who plays the main character is actually was a child soldier in the Sri Lankan Civil War, which I didn't realize who went on for almost 30 years. I believe only ended in the late 2000s. So there's definitely a commitment to authenticity there, and just something that looks very powerful about this film. And hopefully, I'm hoping that it kind of avoids cliches of an immigrant story, which I guess kind of ties into my question, which is, how does this kind of story, a very different kind of immigrant story, how does that play in the current zeitgeist with regard to immigrants in various countries, not just the United States, and seeing how that film plays with her, if that's even something that it's interested in. Have you heard of this movie, Alec?
No, I actually haven't heard of it. It's not really on my radar, so it's definitely interesting. It reminds me a little bit of, not in content, but in terms of just how well received it's been and the heavy subject matter of last year's movie that was huge out of Cannes, which was Son of Saul, of course, which Did you end up seeing that?
I couldn't see it. I couldn't find a copy of it. Plan on reviewing it along with Heart of a Dog and James White, which were two other films that I could not find either streaming or on DVD because they hadn't been released yet. That was one I didn't get to see, but I plan on seeing and doing probably capsule reviews of those. Just to kind of finish up 2015.
For me, Son of Saul was a movie that I could have seen a lot and had to really be forced into it by circumstance because it just, everybody kept saying, I know that you probably don't want to see another Holocaust movie, even though we're saying that it's good, but seriously, it's really good and you should watch it. And I was saying, I kind of agree with the first half of what you said, which is I don't want to see another Holocaust movie, even if it's really good. But eventually, it was actually just pure coincidence. I actually showed up to the movie theater to go see a different movie. And the film, I was expecting there to be 20 minutes of previews, but it was an independent cinema. And they told me that there was actually only 10 minutes of previews. And so I would have been about 10, 15 minutes late to see the film that I wanted to see. So I was like, all right, fine. I guess fate is forcing me to see Son of Saul. So I'm going to see it. And I did, and I was just absolutely blown away. Everyone is right.
Well, that's great.
It's unlike any Holocaust movie you're ever going to see, even though everyone said that to you and you probably don't believe them. It's just it's so kinetic in the way that it is put together and the way that it plays with perspective. I don't know if you know much about the film, but the camera never leaves the protagonist's side the entire time. You're either seeing what he's seeing or you're just above his head, facing in his direction or facing away from his direction, but you're always right there next to him. So you just have this very visceral experience this whole time. And of course, it's the Holocaust and they're in a concentration camp and there's a lot of tragedy all around you and a lot of really brutal, horrible things, but you only ever catch glimpses of it because he's been desensitized to it by the time that you're seeing this character. And he's on his own mission and that's what he's consumed by. So the way that the horrors are incidental to the story, both makes it somehow you're more able to sit through it and also makes it somehow less okay. Because it's kind of, when you consider that, when you sit back and consider the fact that this is incidental because it's so routine, it's almost more horrific than if you were actually watching it all in glory detail. But yeah, it's a fantastic film. I know that's not related to the summer, but your description of that made me think of this. And I'm thinking that maybe that Sri Lankan film will be yet another movie that I really don't want to see because it's so heavy and so upsetting, and yet I'll probably end up seeing it and loving it. So,
I don't even know if it's a Sri Lankan production because the director is, I believe, French. But I just think it's interesting that this is a story that he wanted to tell. I can't think of many films that deal with recent Sri Lankan history, and specifically someone who's come from there and come to live in Europe. And I don't know how the film is going to play out. The trailer is fairly intense and very emotional, as you might expect. But I just can't think of many other films that are going to have that kind of story. I mean, there was a film that I was considering watching last year. They got a little bit of attention. I believe it was called Mediterranea, which was about an immigrant, I believe he was coming to Italy from Africa, and it was just wow, that's another kind of immigrant story you don't hear a lot about. I'm specifically interested in how Deepan is going to play given the recent climate of specifically Syrian refugees, but refugees in general. That I should point out that this story, Deepan he's very he is a refugee. And interested to see how what the climate is there in France in the particular place that he lives, where it seems like it's very crime is literally outside their window, and just that experience of coming from this one fire into another fire. So it's opening this May supposedly. I'll see. It probably will open later near me, knowing the history of Davis, California.
So remind me again. Your question was, will this be the feel good hit of the summer?
Like I said, I'm interested in seeing how this kind of story, which is a refugee story, plays given the recent climate with regard to other refugees.
Right.
But then there's a question of it's going to be widely seen enough to really enter that conversation.
Yeah, I think you might have a hard time finding it.
Yeah, I have a feeling I will, but I hope I do, and that's probably my most anticipated film of the summer.
One last thing that I wanted to say, I forgot to mention during the Ben-Hur segment, which is pretty sure that we've already seen the best Ben-Hur-esque film that's going to be released this year, and it was Hail Caesar.
Oh man, that's one I got to check out again at some point this year.
I don't think Jack Houston's going to be able to pull off what George Clooney did.
Well, any kind of closing thoughts on this, or?
I feel like I've talked a lot about everything that I could think of. But I will say that in the last 2 weeks, I have recently rewatched all of the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, for the uninitiated films that have come out, all 12 of them, in advance of Captain America Civil War. And I feel like I'd be a pretty good companion on a review podcast for that movie if you choose to do so, given that specific perspective that I'd be bringing to it. I'm very excited for that film. I already have my tickets. I'm seeing it not on Thursday night because I do have a job, but I am seeing it on Friday night in IMAX 3D. So,
oh man.
It's going all out. So we'll see. I think it cost me $30, but I'm excited. I don't want to give your listeners the wrong impression. I also really like quiet, meditative, small movies, but I feel like the summer is the time to indulge in your inner child a little bit and wonder aloud whether Oscar Isaac can really pull off being a giant blue mutant.
we didn't really talk about that at all, because I guess
X-Men Apocalypse, that was the one question that just missed my list. If I had a sixth question, that would be what it was. Can Oscar Isaac pull off being a giant blue mutant? Giant evil blue mutant. I'm so excited to find out, because it seems ridiculous that that's the choice that he made to be in this movie. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to a lot.
All right, well, I think that's going to wrap it up for us at this point. I want to thank you, Alex, for helping me with this as we sorted through kind of our questions about the summer. Where can we find you in the meantime?
Well, I'm on Twitter right now at Media Thinkings. That's MEDIATHINKINGS. A little long. And you can also I have a blog that's been inactive for a little while, but I'm hoping to get it back up and running soon, called overthinkingmedia.blogspot.com.
Cool. You can find me at thecinemaverick.com, where I have been trying to update regularly. Yeah, I have movie reviews, I have lists and that sort of thing, so you can find me there. And we hope to have another podcast up shortly. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll look forward to doing another one of these.